I believe we are all the way live. Hello and welcome to my graveyard. I am your host of the evening, the Cemetery Man from Salem, Mass. Always taking names and kicking candy ass. Live in the color here with you on Grande's Graveyard. Welcome back to another edition of the show. Super excited to have everybody on here tonight because tonight we dive head first into folk horror. And I'm very excited to be doing this show here tonight. This is one that I kind of wanted to do for the longest time. This was a specific topic of horror that I had never gotten into. I mean, of course, I've done exploitation, I've done slasher, I've done psychological, paranormal. I mean, I've dabbled into quite a few of the subgenres of horror. But this is one that I had not really gotten into, and I figured we get into it here tonight because I don't know, I felt we were long overdue. Spring is upon us. The weather's starting to sort of turn around, at least by me, thankfully. And I don't know, I felt like this would be a really fun show to kind of tackle and do here tonight. This all really, the inspiration started from this documentary I watched right here, Woodlands, Dark, and Days Bewitched, A History of Folk Horror. I'm a very big fan of Severn Films, and this documentary, this is like a 3-hour long folk documentary on folk horror. And man, it is very in-depth and insightful. And they gave me quite a few recommendations of folk horror to watch down the road. And in this documentary, though, the very first chapter discusses the Unholy Trinity, which is going to be the topic of the show tonight, where I talk about the 3 movies that sort of created the subgenre of folk horror. Of course, the first being Witchfinder General from 1968. I don't have anything to hold up there. I do not own the Blu-ray. From what I've heard, it's a bare bones Blu-ray, sort of waiting for a better edition. But the second one is this little film right here, Blood on Satan's Claw. And finally, and probably the most famous one of the 3, the Wicker Man. Yes, the Wicker Man. So we're going to be getting into the Unholy Trinity tonight. I'm super excited to talk all things folk horror. We've got a bunch of people in the chat already. Miss Carter was in the house before we even went live. Hey, Grande, not sure what you mean by folk horror. I'm sure it's not Midsummer. I promise we are not. We don't have to talk about Midsummer unless somebody wants to. Oh my God. Yes, from the Wicker Man. Slasher Fred's here. What's going on, good brother? The Master of Fear is here. Fear, how are you? Happy Thursday, my friend. Let's see. Hey, Slasher Fred. Hey, Master. Mateo is in the house. Ciao, Grande. Hi, everyone. Dude, hope I was doing well with you tonight, my friend. Looks like I'm going to be home Thursdays for a while, so I'm looking forward to being able to sit in with the graveyard again. Hell yeah. Good brother Neon Black Reviews in the house. Brother Neil, welcome to my graveyard. Glad to see you in the house tonight. So we got a bunch of people, and I'm flattered as always. It's always nice to see a bunch of people in the house. I figure we start this whole thing off with sort of a definition of folk horror. And, you know, I've got a definition right up here that I was going to read. And I guess here goes nothing. Folk horror is a subgenre of horror film for cinema or television, which uses element of folklore to invoke fear in its audiences. Typical elements include a rural setting and themes of isolation, religion, the power of nature, and the potential darkness of rural landscapes. Yes, that's a kick-ass definition, but just because Google says that's the definition doesn't mean that there's not anything more you could add or what you could take away. To me, the whole idea of folk horror is grand, and you can add to whoever, you know, whatever you want to it. And that this documentary is, in my opinion, a big teacher in that. You know, they go into films that you would never think would be folk horror, like Candyman. Like, oh, that's not a folk horror film. Are you sure? I mean, it goes about a folk tale, about, you know, something that happened long ago in the, you know, period times and things like that. And, you know, who's to say it's not? You know, who's to say what is and what isn't? But what really attracts me to the folk horror genre is the idea of pretty much working horror backwards. And what do I mean by that? Usually, you know, classic tropes and cliches in horror, it's the old dark, creaky house and the darkness, what lies in the darkness, what fears are in the darkness. And that's the genre 101. I mean, it's been like that since the beginning of time. But the whole idea of folk horror, what you know interests me in it, is the idea that most of these movies primarily take place during the day. How do you go about scaring the viewer during the day when the lights are on, when all seems well? And I think personally that is the thing that attracts me the most to this. And using something as beautiful and innocent as nature as Mother Nature itself, and kind of turning it on its ear and dipping into the deep, dark, places you can go with that, just instantly makes me attracted to whatever you're going to put out, because it's taking something beautiful and turning it on its head, giving it a horrific spin. And that's a big reason of what attracts me to folk horror as a genre. I think that's super cool because it's not easy to do. It's easier said than done to scare somebody with the lights on. And all three of these movies have very interesting themes that we're going to get into here just right now. But we're going to kick a couple of comments here. I think that what makes folk horror is having these ancient myths and old superstitions. Of course, I mean, everybody always, coins the term folk tales and tales of things that happened long, long ago, and scary stories that you tell around a campfire. But it could be also much more too. It could be, rituals and witchcraft and wizardry and all of these things. I think it's a very grand genre because there's so much you can do with it. And to me, the whole idea of doing it during primarily day setting and beauty setting, and going through not just the landscapes of Great Britain, which is primarily where these movies were shot, filmed, and take place, the three we talk about tonight, but this documentary goes to show you that it's not just the landscapes of Great Britain. There could be the landscapes of Japan, of America, of all different countries and cultures and things like that. What horrors can their landscapes bring to folk horror as a whole? That's what really turns me on to this, because it can be globalized. Tonight, we're focusing on what gave birth to it, but I think in a lot of ways, without these three films, we wouldn't have these big globalization folk horror movies that we have today. But it's very interesting to think about. You can't hide in the light. That's an awesome idea because most people think light's safe. Exactly. You think light's safe, but who's to say that it is? In these three movies, most of the crazy shit happens when the lights are on during the day, in beautiful, cinematography landscapes where you're like, like in a big dramatic film, this would be, gorgeous, visually stunning, all of these things. But to make it horror, to turn it horrific, I think that's just, it's filmmaking done so well. It's horror done backwards. That's why I really like folk horror. A lot of movies could be considered folk horror, pretty much anything based on some type. Exactly. And they go into that in the documentary. Tales of creatures that we barely have any understanding of. Sure. And Satan being a big one of that when we get into Blood on Satan's Claw. One of my favorite folk horror movies is the 1984 horror classic Children of the Corn, where you have these youngsters living in the small town who worship this god who tells them to murder adults. Yes, that is another one they do mention in the documentary, Children of the Corn, an awesome folk horror movie. But we're going to get into the Unholy Trinity. These are the three films that sort of gave birth to the term folk horror here tonight. And what I appreciated in my show prep of watching these two movies, and then the first one we're going to talk about, Witchfinder General, is how different they all are. Because on paper, before we get into in depth on each one of them has different types of reasons as to why they work. Witchfinder General doesn't have any supernatural elements. A lot of it is discussing violence and discussing, the pure pleasure that the lead character played by Vincent Price gets out of torturing people. And he believes he's doing well in his mind, but is he? That it's a big question posed to the viewer. Of course he's not. Blood on Satan's Claw, that one has supernatural elements in it, and it takes quite a few twists and turns. And then the Wicker Man, which again doesn't have supernatural elements in it. It's all about pretty much your culture versus my culture, and there's so much that film has to say as a whole. Three movies that created a genre, and none of them are really that much alike. They are alike in some of the ways that they're shot, the ways that they look and presented, but all three of them I think have so much different things going on. So this was a very fun show to prep for and watch all three of these movies because they are all so different. And without further ado, we're going to dive right in. I guess I'll do a screen share here of this little movie, but I do want to get a plot synopsis of this one because this is the one I do not own on DVD or Blu-ray, and I'd like to change that someday, but I think it deserves a better edition. First up is from the year 1968 from director Michael Reeves, starring the legendary Vincent Price. This is Witchfinder General. And I give a brief, again, plot synopsis. A young soldier seeks to put an end to the evils caused by vicious witch hunter when the latter terrorizes his fiancee and kills her uncle. Yes, the Witchfinder General from the year 1968. I'm going to do a quick screen share here so people can see a little bit of a visual. I know I'm old school like this. I like for people to see a visual of whatever I'm, holding up here because I don't own the copy. So we're gonna do this here. We have the little visual, and I'll put myself in the corner. The Witchfinder General from the year 1968. Now, this is an interesting little movie right here, and there's quite a bit of backstory to it. Michael Reeves was an upcoming filmmaker, and he had arrived on the scene in the mid 60s, and he had this idea to make this film here. And initially, he wanted Donald Pleasance to play the part of the Witchfinder General. Of course, this Witchfinder named Matthew Hopkins, which was a real guy. Matthew Hopkins was a real person who would go around villages accusing people of witchcraft and wizardry and ultimately murdering them just because he said so. He never ever really had evidence. He never really had proof. He would just go around murdering mostly innocent people. And this film stars Vincent Price in this lead role. Of course, he wanted Donald Pleasance, Michael Reeves, but Donald Pleasance couldn't do it. The studio really wanted Vincent Price, and apparently Reeves and Price hated each other. Absolutely hated each other, and they clashed heads on the set, did not like each other at all. But Price, after the film came out, admitted that he felt it was one of his greatest performances. And I got to say, for Vincent Price, and I mean, I love Vincent Price. Who doesn't love Vincent Price? I mean, of course, The Tingler and House on Haunted Hill. And I mean, so many fantastic horror movies. One of the great horror actors of all time and an icon. But if he's coming out and saying, hey, this is one of my favorite performances, I have to agree with him. I think this is one of Vincent Price's best roles because he really is not playing an over-the-top villain here. He's really playing this sort of more of a sinister character that's getting off on seeing all of these men and women brutally fucking murdered before his eyes just because of a snap of his fingers and because he says so. Very interesting psychology and psyche for a Vincent Price to tackle, and I think he does a really good job. Neon Black Review says, I've never seen Witchfinder General, but I'm game for anything with Vincent Price. Highly recommend. It is on YouTube for free, so you can watch this one for free on YouTube. I highly recommend. It's a very solid film, and I'm excited to get a little bit more in depth on it. Do I think Vincent Price is the GOAT? When it comes to horror movies, there are very few actors that were more important to the genre than Vincent Price was. I mean, the guy made so many fantastic horror movies. And this was, I looked it up, this was film number 75 for Vincent Price, his 75th film. And he was clashing heads with the director because the director really didn't want him. And in vain, they would ignore each other a lot. And Vincent Price just sort of angrily gives this performance. And in a lot of ways, it grounded him. And I think it really does show in the final film because he is very much more sinister as opposed to having fun with it. There's a lot more he gets across with what he doesn't say as opposed to what he does say in this movie. Let's see, Neon Black Reviews. Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, Bela Lugosi, all great actors from way back. And we will be discussing Mr. Christopher Lee when we get into The Wicker Man. Have you seen the episode of Inside Number 9 called The Trial of Elizabeth Gage? Fun take on Witchfinder General with a great ending. I think you would really like it. I have not. Good brother Tom, welcome to the graveyard. And if there's anywhere I could watch that, please let me know because that would be really cool. Welcome to the show tonight, my friend. Long ago during the 1700s, many people were superstitious and believed in witches. And if they saw someone doing that they didn't understand, they would accuse them of witchcraft, which is basically this entire film. And even though this film, it's basically innocent people that they're killing. Red Rusty's in the house. What's up, good brother Rusty? 2019's The Hole in the Ground is my favorite modern folk horror film of the last decade. Haven't seen that one either. I'll have to check it out. But Witchfinder General, we'll get a little bit into the story here. Basically, this one takes place, of course, in the olden days. And we are following our lead character, and he's like this soldier. He is really good at being a soldier. He saves his general from being killed, of course, played by Patrick Wymark, who also shows up, funny enough, in The Blood on Satan's Claw. He saves him one day, and they reward him. Go home and see your mistress. His mistress is Sarah, and he wants to wed her. He wants to marry her. Of course, her uncle is this priest, and he's all for it. Please wed my niece and take her away from here because I know that bad things are coming. And the bad things that are coming, of course, is Vincent Price and John Stern. Of course, the sort of henchman for Vincent Price's character of Matthew. I forget the damn name. Matthew. I said it in the fucking beginning. I forget the damn name. But he's his sort of henchman. And together they kind of come into town to town to town, accusing these people of witchcraft and murdering them in brutal fucking ways. I mean, absolutely brutal ways. They come in and accuse this priest, the uncle, of being a witch, and he denies it and denies it. And they basically start to torture him and stab him with needles in the back and, whipping him and yelling at him to admit that he is, in fact, a witch and he will not do it. And some of the murder sequences in this film are absolutely tremendous, in my opinion. It's just, they're very haunting and visually disturbing. There's a scene where they have these two women and the priest, and they kind of tie them on ropes and gently lower them down into the water below. And Vincent Price's whole ideology is, oh, well, if they float, they're a witch, and if they sink, they're innocent. And either way, though, the idea is you're going to murder them if they're innocent. Even if they're innocent, they're going to sink and drown. So there's no real positive to it. And they fight to swim and survive. And of course, because they do that, they must be witches. And Vincent Price sentences them to an even more horrific death. There's an insane scene in this movie, which for the 1960s is pretty hardcore, where this woman is sort of lowered down in front of a bonfire by her hands, and she's lowered down slowly but surely into this bonfire and burned alive before all of these people, children included, watching this woman be burned alive before their eyes. And then something interesting that Michael Reeves does, he has the children afterwards start roasting potatoes and dinner in this fire that they just burned this woman alive in. Very, very disturbing visual. But a very effective one. And Vincent Price in this film is so cold and cool and calculated. Very interesting performance from Price because it's completely different from anything else he had ever done. Usually Vincent Price, the fun of him, it was that he was over the top and brought a great energy to the films that he was in. In this film, he's a cool, mean son of a bitch. And do not kid yourself about that. He is mean and evil in this movie. And I love that there's a great scene in this where his sidekick, John Stearns, he's asking him, he says, hey, do you take any pleasure out of doing this? And Vincent Price kind of looks like he's taken back by this question. He steps back, stares him in the eyes, and doesn't give an answer. Because we all know the answer is hell yeah. Of course I'm taking enjoyment out of this. Because there is no witches in this film. There are no supernatural elements. It's really just about this person going village to village and murdering all of these innocent people just because he says so. And out of the suspicion that they could be a witch. Very sinister idea to me. The murder sequences in this are very fucking violent and honestly disturbing, I think. Very fairly disturbing. The lead character, of course, of the soldier, he kind of goes away for a lot of the film, but he comes back once he hears all this that is happening. Of course, his mistress Sarah is sexually pleasing Mr. Vincent Price, who agrees, okay, if you fuck me, I will, spare your uncle for now. Of course, he's full of shit and he still gets the girl. Classic VP, baby. Gotta love Vincent Price getting some ass and still going back on his word and killing this guy, even though she gave him, her whole body. Very sinister. I mean, this character is very dark. But I think, some of the brilliance of this movie too is the psychology of the main character of coming back and vowing to get his revenge against Vincent Price for not only, killing his beloved soon to be, in-law, but for violating his woman. And he comes back with a vengeance and he's trying to kill Vincent Price's character. And there's a lot of cat and mouse. He's chasing after Vincent Price. And this thing really has a very fun finale. So spoiler alerts here. The finale takes place in this sort of dungeon where Vincent Price is going to kill the mistress, and the soldier comes in and absolutely starts hatcheting the fuck out of Vincent Price. I mean, brutally murdering him. Until these people come in and they see it all going down and they shoot Vincent Price in the head just to put him out of his misery. And the lead character, he turns towards these two that have put Vincent Price out of his misery and goes, "You took him from me." And he starts yelling, "You took him from me," almost to say, let me get my vengeance. Let me get out what he has been delivering throughout this whole film. And that is the sadistic pleasure of vengeance and violence. And I sort of think this movie does a double turn where throughout the whole film, we're watching Vincent Price do these malicious, evil things. But by the end, our lead protagonist, he has almost become Vincent Price because he wants to get the same sadistic pleasure in killing someone. Do two wrongs make a right? I don't know. In this case, I would think the lead character is totally justified. If you murdered my soon-to-be in-law who loved me and showed me nothing but warmth, and if you had sex with my soon-to-be wife, I mean, what else would there be to do than to get vengeance and murder somebody and do it long, slow, and painfully? To me, that there's no more logical answer than to go and kill the person. But I don't know. Does it make him any better? Does it make him any worse? I don't know. I think it's a very interesting question to pose the viewer at the end, and I think it's a really, really well done film. Michael Reeves unfortunately passed away at the age of 25. It was so sad because I'm 25, so it's hard to imagine that this guy was an up and comer, and what else could he have brought to us as film audiences? It would have been really interesting to see what else he could have brought. But he died of a unfortunate drug and alcohol overdose, and it would have been interesting to see what he would have made for years to come down the road. But in a lot of ways, his legacy lives on because this is considered widely to be the very first folk horror movie, at least the one that gave birth to the name. And Witchfinder General, I think, is one that people really need to see. I really like this movie. And I will be honest, at times this can feel like almost more of a Western or an action film because the supernatural elements aren't really there. However, I do think that for what it's worth, this is a very important horror film and one that I would dare to say was a little bit ahead of its time, especially with the murder sequences, because they do not hold back. They do not shy away. And, in a year of 1968, where George Romero came out with Night of the Living Dead, this is a film that I feel like sort of gets a little bit overshadowed and a film that it's funny. The modern zombie film was given birth to in 1968. And I would say the modern folk horror film was given to, birth to by this film right here in 1968. This is Witchfinder General, a movie I highly recommend. If I had to rate this one out of 10, I'd give it a solid 8 out of 10. I think it's a solid enough movie, one that I recommend people give a watch if they have not seen it already. Back to comments. Vincent Price was on the series Scooby-Doo in the show 13 Ghosts, where he played character Vincent Van Ghoul. The series involved Shaggy, Scooby, Scrappy, and Daphne. Very cool. Let's see who escaped from a chest. Hey, Grande, would you consider Bone Tomahawk a folk horror? That's the thing, Mateo. And by the way, I love that movie. I love Kurt fucking Russell, as you know. And of course, he is your avatar there. I think it has elements of it. It's funny, like, folk horror can have Western elements. And I think I would consider Bone Tomahawk to be sort of a Western too. It's a Western, it's a folk horror, it's a regular horror. Like, it has a lot of different themes. Action. To me, when you add a lot of elements and blur the lines, your film could be anything you want it to be. So I would say absolutely yes, in my opinion. I love Karloff Cheney Jr. Haven't really seen anything Vincent Price has done. Any suggestions? I love The Pit and the Pendulum. I love The Abominable Dr. Phibes. I love The Tingler, House on Haunted Hill. Vincent Price, in my opinion, I mean, there's a ton. I mean, really more quantity than quality, probably. But I love Vincent Price. He's convincing people to do horrible things to innocent people for his own enjoyment. He's a monster hiding in plain sight. That's scary. Exactly. And I agree completely, Fear. I agree completely because that's a different type of horror psychology. When you go into a folk horror film, at least ignorantly I'm thinking all of these movies are going to be supernatural, right? Although I had seen the Wicker Man before. So to be honest, I thought there would be supernatural elements. There's not. There is no witchcraft in this. There is nobody guilty of witchcraft in this. There is a man guilty of being a monster that is murdering innocent people because of his ignorance and because of what he believes to be witchcraft and wizardry. And it's not. It's not any of those things. In my opinion, it's an excuse. I think it's Vincent Price's character's Matthew Hopkins, his excuse to murder people in plain sight with a big, big grin smile on his face, just for the pleasure of seeing it done. In my opinion, I agree with you. That is scarier than any witch I've ever seen in any film, dare I say it, because that's it could really happen. That's why when you look throughout the history, the annals of American history or global history, and you see people that, either serial killers or dictators or people that murdered a lot. Those are real life monsters, and they're scarier than anything you can conjure up in a witch film, in my opinion. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Okay, giving Miss C some recommendations. The movie The Crucible also involves the witch trials. Absolutely. Given more recommendations. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's get back to here. The original House of Wax is sort of a remake of a movie called Mystery of the Wax. Oh, that's a Vincent Price classic. House of Wax too. The remake of House of Wax was decent. Plus, you get no. That is the highlight of the House of Wax remake. Absolutely agree with that. But coming up next, though, this is from the year 1971, and a movie that I have really grown to become quite a big fan of, and the only one of these three that does have supernatural elements. So it's interesting in and of that fact. And this is from director Piers Haggard. This is Blood on Satan's Claw. Yes, this is the out of print Blu-ray from Severin Films, limited to 3,000 copies. You want this sucker now? It costs like over $100 on eBay. Like, it is a very, very expensive little Blu-ray. Of course, I could show the actual case here too. Very cool little cover artwork here. I've grown to really, really enjoy this movie. I think this is arguably my favorite of the three. It's this or the Wicker Man that I would say is my favorite of the three. I've got a brief plot synopsis here for you guys, though. In 17th century England, the children of a village slowly convert into a coven of devil worshippers. Yes, the Blood on Satan's Claw. Now, this movie is very interesting when you get into the background. We get to the background first. So I want to first of all thank Mr. Billy Henry, who he was on for my Omen show. He was the one that told me this. I didn't know this, until actually my show prep this week. He told me this before I found out. This film was originally envisioned to be an anthology film. They wanted to do 3 separate stories and intertwine them all with this sort of corpse of a fiend that is found towards the beginning of the film. And about halfway into production, they decided, hey, let's not do 3 stories. Let's try to make it all one big story. And a lot of people consider this thing to be a big mess because of that, because you're trying to take 3 separate stories, combine them into one. You can see how it can get messy. But I personally think this is a fantastic horror movie, and a horror movie that people really need to talk about and see more, because it has everything I look for in a great horror movie. First off, right off the bat, cinematography is exceptionally outstanding. I mean, wonderfully done. And to me, of these 3 movies, it is easily the best shot from a DOP and cinematography standpoint. It is a gorgeous looking film. Of course, the director of photography is a funny name, Dick Bush. That's the guy's name, Dick Bush. Dick Bush, you did a hell of a job with the cinematography in this movie. All of the sort of artistic shots that director Piers Haggard sets up, where the rough bark of a tree will be in, the foreground of a shot, and it'll be a character's eye looking through the forest and things like that. I mean, very artistically and visually stunning. This is a very good looking film, and this Blu-ray transfer is off the charts. It is worth whatever the $100 pay is on eBay. It is that good looking of a film, that good of a transfer, in my opinion. And this thing, it is an interesting story. It basically tells the story. It starts off with this man in the fields, and he comes across the corpse of this fiend. He goes home to tell his aunt and uncle. They do not believe him, of course. And then that very night, he just says, hey, listen, I want you guys to meet, the woman I want to marry. He brings her in. They do not accept of her or approve of her. They make her sleep in the attic. All of a sudden, we hear screams of terror, and they go up to check on her, and she has this giant claw for a hand and kills the aunt, and all of this craziness, and they escort her out. She has this kind of sadistic look on her face as they take her out, and you feel like she's been almost transformed and taken over, by a supernatural entity. Very haunting beginning of this film. And then we bleed into my favorite part of this film, which is the whole child aspect and the themes of children in horror in this film. Of course, the lead, our villain in this, is played by Linda Hayden, who I have as the thumbnail. She does an exceptional job as the villain in this. She is just absolutely beautiful, but at the same time intimidating and haunting and scary. And to me, that's folk horror 101. It's taking something as beautiful as a Linda Hayden and as innocent as somebody so young. And again, like I was saying in the beginning, turning it on its head, making it horrific. Because if Linda Hayden opens her arms to you, why wouldn't anyone go to hug? You gotta see what is behind the eyes, what's in beneath, what's under Satan's claw or Satan's skin. And it may be beautiful on the outside, but it can be oh so terrifying and evil on the inside. I love Linda Hayden in this. She just brings a great screen presence. In my opinion, a similar presence as to what Tony Todd brings to a Candyman. I think Linda Hayden brings to this film a great presence as the villain. And I think a lot of films miss that. It's a great casting of her in this movie. And there's some great scenes of horror in this as she sort of leads this coven of children. And they are, pretty much one by one picking off some of the kids in the village. There's a great scene where one of the kids in the school has a crush on her. He's sitting at his porch and eating an apple, and these two little girls come up to him. And I swear, Stanley Kubrick, you ripped this off, you son of a bitch. May you rest in peace, though, because you're one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. These two little girls walk up to him and say, "Hey, Mark, come play with us." And they're in like white. I mean, it's very Shining. Like The Shining came out 10 years after this. So I don't know. I feel like Stanley Kubrick watched this one night on television or something and went, all right, I'm going to put that in a movie one day. Come play with us, Mark, forever and ever. They don't really say that, but they do say, come play with us, Mark. And he goes, I don't want to play your girl games. And of course, they say, but Angel will be there. Angel, of course, the Linda Hayden character, Angel Blake. And that gets him to go because, oh my God, I have a crush on her. He has a big crush on her. And they play this game, Blind Man Buff, where he's blindfolded and they're spinning him around. And I love the way Piers Haggard directs this scene because he does a lot of zoom outs where it starts where it's a close up on the character reaching around with the blindfold and they'll zoom out. And almost like this whole coven of children watching him if he was a piece of meat. It's not going to end well for him. And it's going to end horrifically as Angel Blake comes out of nowhere and strangles him to death. The girl that he's in love with does not blink twice about murdering him. Very fucking scary. In my opinion, horror done so right. And the whole Angel Blake character was actually based off of Mary Bell. And if you don't know the story of Mary Bell in, I believe it was the early 60s, or might have been mid 60s, was a child murderer. And she was about 10 years old. She murdered two preschool kids, a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old boy. She strangled them both. And what was so haunting about it was in the court case, in the trial, she was sitting on the stand and with a big smile on her face, as if she had no regrets. And she had these sort of like eyes of a doll or something like a Cabbage Patch Kid, just these uncaring eyes. And she showed no remorse. And the whole idea of how can a little girl, an innocent looking 10-year-old girl, commit such insane murderous crimes and not show any remorse, not show any bit of feeling of sorry. I did this. I was wrong. She doesn't. And it's uncaring. And she looked like she enjoyed it herself. And that's where the Angel Blake character that Linda Hayden plays in this was inspired from. And to me, putting that in this film and executing it from Piers Haggard, excellent storytelling, because to me, it's the big standout of this movie is her performance and how they tackle that, the horror psychology of a child. Very interesting theme to me to tackle. I love, there's another scene where after they kill the Mark boy, one of the kids runs up to his mother and says, "Oh, don't be worrying about Mark coming home for dinner tonight. We took care of him." And she's like, "What are you talking about?" And the kid says, "Hey, he had the devil in him. We had to cut it out. Check the woodshed. You'll see what I mean." And the mother checks the woodshed and finds her son brutally fucking murdered. Like, it's one thing to murder somebody's kid. It's another thing to murder somebody's kid and then taunt their mom about it. Like, Jesus Christ, man. Like, that's some dark shit. And like, it is really well done in this film. Another scene with this great, children coven is the sister of Mark. Her name is Kathy. And again, another actress that just had a very memorable look to her. Of course, I don't know if we have any Doctor Who fans in the house, but apparently she was the assistant on Doctor Who for years. This child actress here. And she had been wanting for years and years to get away from the role. She didn't want to keep being on Doctor Who. So she's casted in this movie as one of the victims. And of course, the whole scene with her, I think, is visually the best scene in the movie as they sort of say, hey, we want to play with you, just like the brother. We want to play with Mark. Now we want to play with Kathy. They have Kathy, come to this seance and they lay her down and they basically have this whole ritual where Linda Hayden sort of seductively sort of invites her in, and they have these great shots of Linda Hayden turning around and this music playing ever so slowly, this sort of like ritual music, very creepy stuff, as they lay her down and she is brutally raped, tortured, beaten, stabbed, and murdered right before our eyes. Unbelievable. I mean, very, very hard to watch. And to me, this is the difference between 1960s horror and 1970s horror. 1970s horror will go there. I Spit on Your Grave, exploitation horror, Last House on the Left. The 70s was more of an era where filmmakers just went crazy. And not to say that Witchfinder General that we just talked about isn't brutal in its own way, but here, I mean, the murder and rape and beating of a child in front of us and not turning the camera away is truly fucking horrific to watch in this movie. And it is, again, horror done right. But coming full circle on my Doctor Who story, this actress, she didn't want to be in Doctor Who anymore. So on the set, they told her, hey, you're going to be one of the victims and you're going to be raped and beaten and stabbed and killed. And apparently she thought this was the greatest thing in the world, the actress. She was running around the set that day and saying, I'm going to be raped. I'm going to be raped. And ran around the set in enjoyment and having fun with it. So it's funny how, for an audience viewer, for me watching this, you sit here and I'm fucking terrified. But the actress, she considered it a great big moment in her career because she was so sick of doing one type of role. So very funny little story there. I thought I had to share. I can get the actress's name because I see people in the comments asking about it. Who played Kathy? It was Wendy Padbury. That was the actress, and she was thrilled about filming the rape scene where she gets brutally fucking raped, stabbed, killed, and murdered. So it's absolutely weird. But I mean, it is what it is. Thanks. I'll try to find. Thanks for all these suggestions. That role was cut short because Price died during the time of shooting. Edward Scissorhands. I missed some of the comments. Maybe Price also did of course, that's a classic. A Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. Absolutely, that is Linda Hayden in this movie. Funny enough, John Steele mentioned she sort of looks like Billie Eilish. I agree completely with that. She does sort of look like Billie Eilish. She's the bad guy in this movie, funny enough, too. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Thanks. Now I'm going to be singing Thriller in my head. But no. Doctor Who. There we go. We had a Doctor Who fan. Yes, Doctor Who, 1960s. And the actress, once again, she was Wendy Padbury. She was thrilled to do this film because of that. I don't think I've seen Blood on Satan's Claw, so I'm putting it on the watch list too. Highly recommend. And I really do, because this is like, when I watched this for the first time, it fucking blew me away. Like, I was like, that is why I love horror. Like, it has everything in it why I love horror. Now, we will get into my one big negative of this movie coming up, and it will contain some spoilers, but again, that's my least favorite part of the film. So that is what it is. Did not know this movie, but I have a sweet spot for evil kids. I'm going to watch it for sure. Grande. Dude, awesome. Yeah, no, this for I think children horror, this is a fucking really scary movie. Like its sequences of horror are truly effective. I think the world of this movie, I really do. But we are, like I said, we're going to get into my one big negative. Doctor Who to Doctor What the Fuck. Yeah. LOF, who knew the scene of such darkness could bring someone such joy. Yeah, no, that's sometimes that is what it is. Like, I mean, I guess if somebody has felt the typecast for that long, you'd be thrilled to do fucking anything. And then we're going to get into that with Christopher Lee, because in the Wicker Man, in my opinion, the Wicker Man's the most important movie of his entire career, because it was the film where he broke the stereotype casting of being Dracula. And we'll get into that when we get into Wicker Man, but I do believe that that was the most important film of his career. Haven't heard of this one, but I'm down with an evil kid movie. Well, that's the thing too, Miss C. It is an evil kid movie. It has a lot of evil kid elements and evil kid scenes, but there's a lot else going on in it. And I think that's why people find it messy. Because like I said, this was supposed to be an anthology. It was supposed to be 3 separate stories. The kid story was going to be one, but that is easily the subplot that takes the best impact of this film. Labyrinth UFC breakdown, smash like, brother. Thank you so much for the support. I appreciate it as always. I prefer Vincent Price's narration to Black Widow by Alice Cooper. Sure. FYI, it's supposed to be streaming on Tubi. Blood on Satan's Claw, is it? That's cool if that's the truth. I didn't know that. I know that this Blu-ray is super out of print, and it goes for over $100 on eBay. So good luck getting this. I'm stoked I got it because I really am a big fan of the film. But should I don't know. Should I get my biggest negative of this movie? It's tough to go into. I see, because I really like this movie. I really champion this movie, and I really recommend this movie. But I do have a big problem with it, and it's the ending. The third act of Blood on Satan's Claw is quite weak. It's quite standard, and it really doesn't go with the rest of the film. Like the first hour, I am so invested. I'm so enjoying everything. I mean, the scenes of horror, the characters, the special makeup effects, the visuals of the claw and the fiend in the ground, and the child murders and all of these things, and the rituals and seances, and using something as, like I said, as innocent as a child, a beautiful Linda Hayden, and making her so evil. I love using all of these themes in folk horror, and visually it's stunning. But then the last act happens. And it's my biggest negative with this film, because I really do not care for the ending. Like the last half hour, I really don't care for. I almost wish they could go back and change it because they had so much potential there with the first 2/3. And spoiler alert here, the ending, basically Patrick Wymark is in the beginning of this film. He disappears for about 45 to 50 minutes, not even kidding. Then he shows back up and says, we must kill them all. There's a big ritual, which is sort of a letdown, because even though you do this big ritual seance, it's not half as good as some of the ones in the middle of the movie. Like you'd think, okay, this is the end of the film. You're going to do this big ritual, big seance, similar to the Wicker Man, like how big the end of the Wicker Man feels. Whereas the end of this feels rather small compared to what else has gone on in the film. And, that's my biggest negative with it, in my opinion, at least. And basically, they're having this ritual. There's a woman that gets naked and dances in front of the sky. That's basically the highlight of the ritual. There's not much. It's just so small. It's not. There's so much more I felt they could have done. Be more weird with it. There's a Satan creature standing with Angel Blake, and it's sort of a weird design. I almost wish they should have kept it in the shadows, because it doesn't age well, the effect. It just looks goofy. It has like half of its face is all furry. The other half is just a one eyeball. I mean, I don't know. It's sort of the finale of this movie. And then basically good triumphs over evil rather quickly. Patrick Wymark runs in, stabs Satan, puts him in the fire. Angel Blake tries to run away. She runs right into a fucking rake and dies. And then we sort of fade to credits. I mean, it's a rather blah ending to an otherwise fantastic fucking film. And it really irks me, because I know the potential they had here. And I know they argued behind the scenes for a long time over how to end the film. And it's one of those things you could see I don't think they knew how. I really think they just threw money at it and figured, fuck it. Like we'll just throw money at it and see if this, good triumphing over evil is a good way to end it. I would have honestly, special guest Booker, I would have had Linda Hayden and the Covenant kids win, because they were so much more interesting than any of the protagonists in this film. You almost wanted to spend more time with the villains. This is a movie where I sort of like the villains much more. There's so much more going on with them. And there's also great sense of body horror in this film that I wanted to touch on, where some of these kids, they feel they're being infected or diseased by Satan, and they grow this sort of fur on their skin. And I don't know. It's a very creepy and effective body horror in this film that I really also appreciate. I don't know. I think this thing has a lot going for it. I really do. Like, don't let my dislike of the ending ruin it for you. Maybe you will like the ending. Maybe, people that do like happy endings will like it. And I won't lie, I generally do like happy endings. But for a movie that had this potential and that was so good for the first hour and had me on the edge of my seat, the ending it's one of those movies that's like, like what could have been if you nailed that ending. Maybe this movie would have been as big as The Wicker Man. Maybe it would be the cult folk horror film instead of being one that is very less talked about. It's things like this that make me wonder, but as a whole, I do think it's a really good movie. It's just a weak ending, in my opinion. But I mean, that is what it is. Vincent Price didn't do horror. He was also in the movie 10 Commandments. That's true. So it was an out of nowhere happy ending. Maybe it wasn't the original ending. Maybe they had to change it because people didn't like the sad ending that they were going to make. I don't know, man. Like, I get the vibe that they were like, shit, like, what do we do to end this? Maybe just good prevails over evil. Apparently, I think what happened was the producers felt good should win. But when you have a villain this good as Linda Hayden and the fucking screen presence that she brings and the scenes of horror in this, how horrific they are and disturbing, and murdering children and, turning people over and getting marked by Satan. I mean, all these evil elements that this movie has, to end on such a blah, weak, good wins, very blah ending, man. Very blah. I don't know. I personally don't care for the ending. But the movie as a whole, from a cinematography standpoint, from a horror standpoint, acting, everything else is like perfect. So it's a hard one to rate. For me, it's going to be like an 8.5 out of 10. I really enjoy this movie. I take the full 1.5 off of the ending. I really do. The ending is just a crippler to what I think could have been a 10 out of 10 horror movie. But I don't know. I would like to hear other people's thoughts on this one. Did the ending work for you? Am I crazy? Do you feel this thing was a mess? Because I know a lot of people do not like this movie. They consider it to be a big mess. But for my money, what is done right in this movie is done perfectly right. And what's done wrong is done oh so wrong. It's sort of a polarizing feel. But I don't know. I really do enjoy this movie, Blood on Satan's Claw. I highly recommend people give this a watch because of the three, this might be my favorite. The Wicker Man might be the better movie, and it certainly has a better third act. But this movie, from a visual standpoint and the idea of what I'm going to look for in a horror film, not even just a folk horror film, but a horror film, this one encapsulates the 1970s perfectly. It is distinctly 1970s, and I really appreciate it for that. Linda Hayden's performance, Piers Haggard's direction, the cinematography from Dick Bush. Blood on Satan's Claw is a damn good horror film, in my opinion, and one I highly recommend. So check this one out if you haven't already. Let's see. Oh, no more comments here. Okay, no worries at all. Oh no, wait, we do have one. It certainly sounds interesting enough, so I'll definitely check it out. Yeah, please do, man. I would love to hear your thoughts because like Neil is like a great channel. First of all, so shout out to Neil's channel. He covers everything. I'm not sure. Maybe you have covered folk horror and I missed it. But that would be interesting. I would be interested to hear your thoughts on all three of these movies, like because these really are the founding fathers of folk horror. So it was a fun show for me to kind of prep for here tonight, and like I was saying before, how different they all are. Witchfinder General being this movie about a monster that enjoys the pleasure of violence. Blood on Satan's Claw having the supernatural element, adding themes of satanic rituals and witchcraft and evil children and murder and rape and all of these things. And then the Wicker Man, which we're about to get into right now. So I'm super excited about that. This, of course, I guess is the perfect transition to the final film of the Unholy Trinity from the year 1973 from director Robin Hardy. This is the Wicker Man. Yes, the Wicker Man from 1973. Easily the most infamous on this list. And I know when people hear the Wicker Man now, they usually think of the horrendous Nicolas Cage remake. So I preface this by saying, please, if you have not seen this and you have seen that remake, do yourself a favor and see this. Don't watch the remake. Please don't. Like, the remake has garnered its own cult following because of how bad it is on its own two legs, and the bee gifts and all of these things. I mean, it is just a horrendously bad film. But the Wicker Man, to me, is the biggest of these three. It's the one that probably defines folk horror the most because it easily is the most famous of the three of them. Witchfinder General, Blood on Satan's Claw, very much lesser known and talked about. The Wicker Man, though, this one is pretty infamous in the horror genre. So we're going to give a brief plot synopsis and then get into this one. A Puritan police sergeant arrives in Scottish island village in search of a missing girl who the pagan locals claim never existed. Yes, the Wicker Man. A classic, an absolute all-time classic horror movie, and one that every time I watch it, I feel like I get different themes and messages and things going on in the film that really, attract me to it and keep me coming back to this movie. I really enjoy this film. It basically tells the story of Edward Woodward's character, and he travels to this village of Summerisle, and he's in look of a missing girl who he believes has been murdered in his language, or his accent, I should say. She's been murdered, by God. He goes there and basically realizes that this society is completely different from the one that he has been brought up. Of course, he's a devout Christian. He's a very buttoned down, by the book, by the law type of guy. And he enters this whole society where things have completely changed. Things are completely different from what he is used to. Instead of people saving sex for when they're married, there are people literally having orgies on the front lawn by this tavern inn. And he goes in and he's looking for a room, and all of the people are sort of treating him weird. And, there are some weird things going on that he suspects are up. He goes around the village and he believes that the children are being taught lies and they're being taught to lie. And I think what is brilliant about this movie is the whole theme of one culture versus another and one religion versus another. Who's to say that the lead character should go into this village and say that X, Y, and Z are wrong? He sort of just shows up and says, you're wrong for what you're doing. And the first time I watched this, I sort of experienced this being on the side of the protagonist. Of course, he's looking for a little girl. She's missing. He cares about her. He wants to get her home safe. He believes she's been murdered. He's trying to do good. At least the first time I watched this movie, that was I was like, okay, I'm with this guy. But this thing is so much deeper than that. And I think it's really challenging us as a viewer, because when you watch this, we almost are with this lead character. It's like we envision and experience this film through his eyes. But in a lot of ways, even though this film, it sacrifices him, in a lot of ways, I see it as the film sacrificing us. And that's what really scares me about this film. We're the outsider introduced to this different world and different culture and land run by Christopher Lee's Lord Summerisle. And this film, not just does it sacrifice him, it's sacrificing us. Very interesting theme of horror that really just inspires me to always kind of go back to this film because of how smart it is. This is a great movie. And so here we get to some comments here. The bees. Yeah, no, God, so bad. If you watch the trailer to the original Wicker Man, it includes the line from Hamlet. Yes, the bees. It's been forever since I've seen the original Wicker Man, so I need to revisit it here soon. Totally. Wicker Man was so hyped. I was expecting a terrifying horror movie. Didn't finish it the first time. Gave it another chance, knowing it's a slow, folky pace it has, and loved it. Yeah, no, this does go at its own pace. It's funny. It's like, in a lot of ways, the opposite of Satan's Claw, where the first hour of Satan's Claw is very exciting and interesting and scary. The last half hour is sort of And then this movie, the first hour is slow. It's methodical. It's building at slow pace. And then the last half hour, it really pays off. It's the exact opposite from a pace standpoint. The original Wicker Man is almost like a musical. Yes, a ton of musical numbers, including Willow's song and, the Tavern Keeper's Daughter and like great songs in this movie as well. I was expecting the first time either. Yeah, exactly. I've noticed that one thing in the movie doesn't explain how the people of the island mailed the letter of the so-called missing girl. Yeah. And I have this whole theory. I think that from the word go, it's a trap. It really is. I think it's a trap for this lead character where he sees, for example, on the wall, every year they have this harvest. And there's a picture of a little girl in the middle and all of these things that come out in the harvest around them. signifying that, we've got this youth and we've got a great harvest and things are going well. There's 1 year missing. And it's, of course, the one with the missing girl that he's gone looking for. And he believes that the crops failed, therefore they're going to sacrifice this girl so their crops come in the following year. But it's all a trap. It's totally all a trap. They are trying to lure him in. And who is better as a sacrifice than this man from the outside who questions their culture and calls it wrong? This buttoned up guy, this straight devout Christian, this virgin who is engaged to be married but has never had sex. Very interesting themes here of why he's the one picked and trapped to be sacrificed. But, another thing, that the reason that this has become a folk horror legend is a lot of the imagery in the film. Of course, there's the maypole and the kids dancing around the maypole. Of course, like I said, the orgies outside, very 1970s with that. This is a very sexual film with a lot of sexual themes and desires and things like that. Something that I never expected when I first watched this movie. In my opinion, this is just a very grand little movie because it has a little bit of everything going on. And of course, we're introduced to Christopher Lee's character. And Christopher Lee, I wanted to touch upon this because I do think this is the most important role for Christopher Lee's entire career. If you don't remember, Christopher Lee, years and years before this, was really known for playing Dracula. And by this point, he had played Dracula 8 or 9 times. And he was really looking to break the typecasting that came with being Dracula. I believe he had made Dracula 1972 AD right before this. He was really trying to break out of that mold. And funny enough, he worked on this film for free just so he could be in something else and try to get his name out there as something more than just the actor that played Dracula. And in this movie, I think, in similar vein to how Vincent Price gives his best performance in Witchfinder General, I would say this is Christopher Lee's best performance as Lord Summerisle. And a true, really important film in his career because he was breaking the stereotype of being Dracula. You look at Karloff. As much as we love Boris Karloff, he will forever be Frankenstein's monster. You look at Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi played Dracula once, and forever he is remembered as Dracula. Lon Chaney is forever remembered as the Wolfman. Like, there are a lot of these guys that hey, I'm not saying it's a bad thing to be remembered as something as iconic as a Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman, etc. But don't you also want to be remembered as a great, grandiose actor from many different things? And this was the movie that really broke Christopher Lee out of that. We don't just remember him as Dracula now. Some people my age will remember him in the Star Wars films, the Lord of the Rings films, the Wicker Man. I mean, he did so many great movies, Christopher Lee. And this was really the most important movie in his career because I think not only did he give his best performance on making no money, but he also was able to break out of that stereotype. Not easy to do. And considering he worked for free, he damn well better believed in this movie, and he did. And he gives a sinister performance as the sort of leader of this sort of cult. And I love there's some great scenes with he in the lead, and he's talking about, my father, he taught me when I was growing up to love nature, but to also fear it. And that, again, that line right there, to me, that's folk horror. We do love nature. It is beautifully and visually aesthetic, but you must also fear it as well, because the darkness that is lying beneath can also be lying in all of this beauty around us. A great line. And I love the lead. He brought you up to be a pagan. He's accusing him of all of these things. And Christopher Lee is just so fucking sinister in this movie. I really enjoy it. And, to me, it mirrors a perfect character of someone who is seeing the world change and trying to keep the ways of the old school around. Someone who much prefers things the way they were. That's Christopher Lee's character in this movie. He wants things to remain the way they were, as opposed to, what they're coming in real life, everyday society. And I think it mirrored the 1970s at that time. And it's a really interesting performance and role for Christopher Lee. I really like him in this film. There's, of course, a bunch of great horror sequences. I always loved the one where Willow, the tavern keeper's daughter, she tries to seduce the lead through the wall through her Willow song. and she's banging on the wall and naked and trying to get him to come into the other room to have sex with her. I mean, very, again, even though it's a sexy, beautiful woman, haunting in a way, very haunting in a way. The song, and she's whistling, ooh, fucking creepy, man. I mean, absolutely fucking terrifying. But again, think about that on paper. A beautiful woman trying to seduce this guy. How could that be creepy? They somehow do it here. The creepy choice of music and the way the song is performed, very creepy. And of course, some of the scenes in the society of seeing how they run their society. There's kids are, she says she has a sore throat and they shove a frog into her mouth. You should be fine now. Now he has your sore throat. Here's a candy. It's just some of the weird things that they do, some of the rituals that these naked women have around these sort of stone henges. Very visually appealing. And interesting enough, the original cut of this film was about 20 minutes shorter, and they cut all of that stuff out. And they were going to dispose of the film. It was actually a crazy story behind the scenes. They had some of those shots in canisters, and they were going to destroy them. And I don't know if it was the producer or Robin Hardy or whoever went and said, hey, wait a minute, keep that stuff here. What if, maybe we want to put that into the film because it's a big part of it. And it's spliced back in there. It's funny. If you watch this Blu-ray, you can clearly tell there's parts that are looking good in Blu-ray high definition and the parts that are spliced like that look also grainy still, like 35 millimeter or even 16 millimeter. It's amazing to see, but they wanted that cut out from the film because the producers, the studio, they didn't get it. Why is that in there? That's unnecessary. No, it's completely necessary because this is a film that doesn't really have, at that time, a distinct genre. This created one. This is the trendsetter. Even though Witchfinder General is considered the first, Blood on Satan's Claw the second, this the third, this is really the one that I think made it popular folk horror. This is the one that people remember. And that's why I really love The Wicker Man. It's so much going on to it. It's a film that in a lot of ways gave birth to the entire folk genre, folk horror genre. And of course, the ending. I always thought the ending of this film was horror done to perfection. Of course, you have this whole ritual going on, and he thinks he's about to save this girl that he's been looking for. He realizes he's been set up and that they are going to sacrifice him in the Wicker Man. And I just love how this whole finale plays out as this lead character realizes that he's been played by the society and he is the fool. He's even wearing the fool's outfit to go full 360 with it. And Christopher Lee explains that last year the crops did not grow, so he had to sacrifice animals and a virgin and all these things, and who better than you? And I love the way Christopher Lee delivers the line, "Come, it is time to keep your appointment with the Wicker Man," as they sort of walk this guy to his death in this giant Wicker Man, which you see on the cover here. And they put him in this cage and light the Wicker Man on fire. And they start singing this joyous song as this man burns alive before their eyes. And the Wicker Man crumbles and the sun is setting. To me, one of the all-time great moments in the history of the genre, and horror done perfect, in my opinion. I mean, look at that scene as a whole. You have a beautiful sunset across a beautiful hillside and this giant Wicker Man that they built. And it looks so damn real. I mean, the animals are real in there. All of it, it just looks so damn real. But to burn this man alive and to sing in joy, children, men, women alike, holding hands, swinging arms, embracing this, is just so fantastic to me. It is so damn effective when it comes to horror cinema, in my opinion. And the visual of the Wicker Man going up in flames, collapsing, and then you see that sunset as we fade to credits. I mean, to me, one of the all-time great horror endings. And the exact opposite of A Blood on Satan's Claw, where the ending of this, to me, really sets it apart as the classic or the masterpiece that people herald it to be. I really love that ending. It is just so fucking haunting where you're just like, oh my God. Because again, visually, aesthetically beautiful. Hillside, the waves, the sunset, visually beautiful, but oh so horrific is this man that we've been following and we thought was the hero of the film. He is the fool. of the film. And the film, like I said before, it sacrifices not only him, but I think the viewer, because we're all on his side when you first watch it. And then when the whole thing kind of comes to a close, you're like, Jesus, like, that is fucking horrific. I don't know, man. To me, horror done really well. I really enjoy this movie. Let's see. I might want to rewatch this soon because I recently rewatched Midsummer and I want to see if they are similar as I think they are. So, Midsummer, and Midsummer is a big, in my opinion, wannabe of this film. For every theme that it has that is similar, like the ending, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Midsummer, the ending of Midsummer is they burn the girl's boyfriend alive and all embrace and sing and cheer. I mean, you blatantly rip the ending of this off. I mean, that goes without saying. The whole folk horror theme, the maypole stuff, visually, aesthetically wise, totally a rip off of this. Theme wise, different. I mean, this is talking more about the themes of being afraid of one's religion, one's culture, one's different society, whether you be on one side or the other. But that movie, Midsummer, is more talking about the themes of grief that the lead character is going to. So I understand, and thematically wise, they're different, but visually, aesthetically, ending wise, they're fucking the same. So I don't know, but to me, that movie Midsummer has a tremendous amount of problems. I remember him as Count Dooku. Sure, I know a lot of kids my age that remember him as Count Dooku. So I mean, that is what it is. It's interesting that he was able to branch off. There was a fantasy movie that Christopher Lee where he played the Black Knight called In the Land of Far Away. Very cool. Yeah, that's something crazy about this movie. He did it for free. How many actors have you heard? Exactly. And that's, to me, the thing. Like, sometimes if you're an actor, and no actor would do that nowadays, none. Like, okay, we look at actors that are stereotyped now and in one particular role. I think immediately I think of an actor that I'm not a big fan of, Tom Holland. He is Spider-Man. There's not, like, he did that movie Cherry. Nobody gives a fuck. Nobody cares about Cherry. He is Spider-Man right now. That is it. Will he ever be able to branch out? He's done Uncharted. Nobody cares. It's so hard for an actor to be known as something and then to reinvent their career. Sometimes you have to do something like how Christopher Lee did in this film. And dare I say it, Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff, Lon Chaney, they never were able to do that. They were always going to be remembered for who they were. And that's not, I'm saying, a bad thing. I just think Christopher Lee, you really saw that he really did love acting and wanted to be known as so much more than just the guy who played Dracula. That's what big reason that endears me to this film as well, is how much it meant to Christopher Lee, and his performance is truly haunting in the film. The frog thing is creepy. Keep my daughter's name out your effing mouth. Will Smith watching the Wicker Man. Dude, I would maybe they make a Wicker Man 2, or what they did actually. There is a sequel. People don't remember, The Wicker Tree, that was made after the Wicker Man remake. Avoid it. Robin Hardy directed it, and Christopher Lee does show up for a cameo, but avoid it. Trust me. Burn, baby, burn, the Master of Fear says. You didn't need no supernatural monsters to make this scary. Yeah, that's the thing. 2 of these 3 films don't have supernatural elements of horror. Isn't that interesting? This one's a weird society, but no supernatural. No, I mean, seduction, but that's not supernatural. Seducing someone by singing a song, that's not supernatural. Doing these maypole dances, all of it's logically could happen. There's no like seance of the witch's power and stuff like this. They do talk about the Wicker Man's power because they believe in sacrifice to this guy that their crops will grow back. And their lead is, that's not the case. If you kill me, they're still not going to grow. He's begging and pleading. But again, I think it's interesting. Witchfinder General in this, no supernatural elements, yet they're still scary because there's so much you can do with folk horror. And that's the fun thing coming full circle with this, that I think this documentary did a good job of driving home. Folk horror can be so much. Like we were talking about the outro or the intro, I should say. It can be so many different things. It doesn't have to be supernatural all the time. There's so many different types of themes and horrors that you can dip into it that, if done right, if done effectively, can be even scarier than a supernatural horror being. That's why I really think Witchfinder General and the Wicker Man work as a whole. Not a lot of supernatural themes, but again, that the horror themes are still thematically very well done. I'm a big fan of the Wicker Man. To me, a 9 out of 10. I really enjoy this movie. Probably the best of the 3. I Blood on Satan's Claw, like the first hour of it, is probably my favorite of anything I watched for this. But the last half hour of this is horror done perfectly, in my opinion. One of the great all-time horror movies. Some have called it a horror musical, maybe, just maybe. But The Wicker Man, an all-time classic horror movie, probably the folk horror movie that really got the ball rolling with the entire genre, in my opinion. And probably the most important folk horror movie of all time. Wicker Man, Wicker Men, Manson family on steroids. Yeah, no, I mean, that's not a bad way to put it at all. It definitely has that feel and vibe to it. But I don't know. There's something about it that really brings me back to the Wicker Man. I don't know. That final scene is just so visually haunting, and the people swinging their arms. If people notice, there's the one guy from Clockwork Orange who's the yes, Alex, and then you miss school. Yes, I forget the actor's name. Yeah, I can get his name actually here. Let me see if I can find his damn name, because that actor is absolutely wonderful. Aubrey Morris as the old gardener. He is fantastic. He also shows up in Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange, which was a couple years before this. Nails it. I love to see him in this movie. He put a big smile on my face. And he's one of the lead guys swinging his arms and singing around the Wicker Man. I mean, great stuff. Some of my favorite horror humanity is The Real Monster. Me too. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And to me, adding that alongside of the whole beauty and aesthetic of nature and the visuals that these movies bring, very cool to tackle that as well. Because I think all three of these movies do have elements of human horror. And that's interesting, because that's not something you genuinely think of when you're thinking folk horror. You think more supernatural. But who's to say that it can't be more real life, real human horror monster type of horror to tackle. But that is the Unholy Trinity. Like I said, I would probably rate these. I go in reverse order. This is probably the Wicker Man is probably the best, followed by this one closely, Blood on Satan's Claw, and then Witchfinder General. I really enjoy all three of these movies, though. I highly recommend if you haven't seen them. And I also really recommend this documentary. If you have Shudder, you can watch this whole documentary. It's about 3 hours long. I recommend you watch it all in one go. I know people that will split it up into nights, but I really enjoy this. Aside from the last chapter, like, it's awesome. The last chapter, it's going into folk horror around the world, but they also get a little bit political, like saying that this is some weird shit where they say that 9/11 was a reason of the resurgence of folk horror. Like, what? Like, there's some weird political statements towards the very end of this that I was like, what the fuck? Like, the first 2.5 hours were great. Like, what? All of a sudden it got very political. But the amount of recommendations this gave me, I was like, dude, I cannot wait to do more folk horror. So some way down the road, I really want to watch some of the ones that I wrote down. A lot of these, movies, they show brief clips of. There was one, I think it was called The Demon. Yeah, The Demon, it was called, for 1963. Looked awesome. Really old school, black and white looking folk type of horror movie that I wanted to check out. I want to do more of these folk horror episodes, because I've done, exploitation explosions, video nasties, horror roundtables. I think it would be really cool to do, folk horror volumes, do another one. And this is the three that really gave birth to it. But, who's to say that this is all we should talk about? We could talk about movies that aren't just from Britain. We could talk about movies from all over the world. Maybe we'll do a folk horror episode on, one from each different country, and go through the landscapes and horror landscapes of different countries and cultures. That's, to me, the whole appeal of this whole folk horror. It's not even just this British one. It would be everything. Some relatively recent folk horror that I've enjoyed: The Witch. I loved The Witch. A Hole in the Ground, The Ritual, Thale and Absentia. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. I would say for current ones, I really like Jugface. I also really like, there's this really underrated movie called Wakewood. And it has a similar vein to like it's almost like Pet Sematary if it was more folk horror. Although people would probably, and it is mentioned on here, Pet Sematary is mentioned for what it's worth as a folk horror. It's about this couple, their kid dies and they want to bring him back. And basically the kid comes back, but it can only be for 3 days. And he comes back as the devil. Very fucking good movie, man. I really like Wakewood. That's one that nobody really talks about. Highly, highly recommend that one. Jugface, another one I really liked. Midsummer, beautifully, visually, aesthetically pleasing. But man, the story and characters, like, big thumbs down for me. Oh, okay, cool. That's the same thing that's on Shutter. I'll check that out for sure. Yeah, highly recommend. Yes, yes, Wakewood is awesome. I highly recommend Wakewood to people who have not seen that. Witchmaster is free on YouTube, dude. Of course, Witchmaster is awesome. There's a ton that this documentary gave me that I was like, I didn't even know of. But there was also quite a few where I was like, damn, like I've seen that. I've seen that. Like this movie probably gives you over this documentary gives you probably over 100 horror recommendations. I'm not even over exaggerating. I think this gives you over 100 titles to watch. And then I know that they did release this big folk horror box set called All the Haunts Be Ours, which is like $170 box set. I've heard a lot of mixed on that because from what I've heard, a lot of it isn't folk horror, like maybe a little bit less than half of it, which is a shame. The big one on that set is called Eyes of Fire. That was one made in America, I believe, from 1983 or 1982. That's one I have seen. I do have the Blu-ray of that somewhere over there. That's another folk horror, good movie. That set I wish had more that was on this documentary. It does have some, but not the amount. There's like 100 recommendations on this, and quite a few where I was like, I have seen, quite a few where I hadn't seen. So I was like, damn, for everyone I haven't. So I wanted to dip a little bit more down the road. It gave me some movies to kind of hunt for. Tom says, is Wakewood the Irish movie? Jugface was awesome. Yeah, Wakewood was from 2011. Here, I can look this up because we went a little quicker on the show tonight. Let's see, Wakewood. I thought it was from 2011. This says 2009. Was this David Keating? Hammer Horror. Yes, this is the one. Wakewood from 2009. I'm sorry, I said the wrong year. This is from 2009. Wakewood, directed by David Keating. Highly recommend. This is free to watch on IMDb TV. This is a damn good folk horror movie, in my opinion. Highly recommend if you haven't seen that one. Any Italian horror movies in the documentary? Dude, yes, they cover every single country. They cover a lot in Japan, a lot in Italy, France. I mean, every single country is discussed and covered here. Like they recommend everything. Like I don't know if somebody has a list of all the movies recommended in this, but it was like astounding. And they also go into like what is and isn't folk horror. Like they considered Candyman to be, they considered Children of the Corn to be. There was a lot of stuff on here where I was like, like I never would have thought of that being folk horror, but sure, like it definitely has vibes of it. Personally, Candyman to me more of, I don't know. Candyman is an interesting film. I don't know if it would be folk horror. I love Candyman, but I don't know. Would I consider it folk horror? Like it doesn't have the themes of turning something beautiful into something evil. To me, that's the big theme that gets me, is the turning something beautiful as nature and turning it evil. That's like the big theme of folk horror that I look for and consider something to be folk horror. But who's to say that it should just be, as small of a definition as that? That's why when I read the definition, I said you can add or take away whatever you want. It could be whatever you want it to be. But it was really fun to kind of go down this documentary and get recommendations from all sorts of different countries and cultures and things like that. I don't know. I really appreciated this documentary for that. So it is worth the watch. It is long in the tooth, though, 3+ hours. So you are going to feel every single bit of the 3 hours that this is. But I don't know. I recommend people watch that. You said Candyman so many times. Hope you're not looking in a mirror. No, I am on a camera. I don't know if that would count. If I got killed on live stream by the fucking Candyman, that would suck. Mr. Tony Todd, I love you, by the way. Psychological slasher, sure. Even like okay, I get why somebody could say folk, right? Because you even look at Madman from '82, that you consider to be folk in a way. I mean, the movie takes place in the woods. Granted, that movie's all at night. I would assume, to me, folk horror more day. At least that's in my mentality. But who's to say? It doesn't have to be during the day. The Witch takes place mostly at night, and that's a folk horror movie. I would say psychological slasher. It's, of course, the story of something that happened long, long ago, and now we're dealing with it. So definitely. I think Candyman's a grand film. It really has so much going for it. One of my favorites of the 1990s for sure. Candyman is more urban legend. Yes, urban legends. I guess folk horror includes urban legends. Absolutely. You could urban legends, folk stories, folk tales, however you want to word it. But yeah, no, I would say urban legend slasher, psychological slasher, with a great amount of themes and the backstory. I love that movie. That's a great one. I got to do a Candyman episode one of these days. Black Sunday is Italian, and it is probably considered folk horror. Yes, they get into some of Baba's films. They really it went in depth in that documentary. It was so inspiring to watch. Just curious, is the lighthouse considered folk horror because a lot of it takes place outside and is pretty isolated? I would say no, but maybe people would say yes. I don't know. I didn't. To me, like, okay, what constitutes folk horror for me, like I was saying, it's the visual aesthetic. You want your film to be using nature as a whole, and like I said, turning it evil. That's a big thing I look for in folk horror. But again, it doesn't have to be limited to that. It could be so much more. I didn't see that. The Lighthouse to me is a fucking psychological horror movie about somebody who, finds out their true identity at the end and goes absolutely ballistic. Because that's what I always kind of got from the ending of The Lighthouse. When Pattinson takes the walk up of the lighthouse and gets to the top, I think what he finds is his true identity. And that terrifies him, and he thus falls down back the steps and is found dead on the beach. He could not come to terms with who he truly was. That's, to me, very psychological horror to me. But again, I don't know. I'm not trying to say that it can't be. Maybe people have an argument as to why it is. For me, folk horror must have a rural aspect. I would agree with that wholeheartedly. To me, there's got to be something with the forest and the landscape. It's something like that. The green grass and the Blood on Satan's Claw has that throughout. I mean, it's gorgeous. The where this was shot. I mean, some of the trees and the colors in the film. I mean, just visually just stunning, especially on this Blu-ray transfer. Stunning to look at. But yeah, no, I agree. I think it has to have the rural aspect. I can read here. I can read the definition one more time. Folk horror is a subgenre of horror film for cinema and television, which uses elements of folklore to invoke fear in its audience. So using the folklore to invoke fear in the audience. Typical elements include rural setting, themes of isolation, religion. Religion's another one. It shows up in a lot of these movies. The power of nature and the potential darkness of rural landscapes. To me, that's the potential darkness of rural landscapes. Like taking your country or your city or your town or wherever you are at and making it horrific. Brilliant to me. And that's why I really liked that they gave you all these recommendations of other places because, for me, making America scary, I'd have to pick a forest in America. But for somewhere else, they'd have to pick a forest or a rural landscape somewhere else. And you can see all these new visual things and add different types of cultures to your horror film. I think it's really cool. It's a really cool subgenre of horror. So would Leprechaun Origins be folklore? Leprechaun Origins is a piece of shit. I don't know if it's folklore. It's folk shit. I don't know. It's a bunch of bullshit. Leprechaun Origins, that's the worst Leprechaun movie, man. That is a piece of shit. But I don't know. But yeah, no, unless anybody else has anything else they want to talk about in here. I know we're ending a little bit early tonight, but if you, like I said, if you guys want to talk about something, I'm down to hang out for a little bit longer. I've always thought of folk horror as having nature and or pagan mythos, but I can accept a broader definition. Yes, and I can even accept a lesser definition too. I would see that too, like a pagan mythos involving Satan and God and all of these things. But again, it doesn't necessarily have to be religious. Witchfinder General, Vincent Price's character believes that God is behind him and believes in that all he's doing is all well and good. But like I said, in my opinion, he's using that all as a mask so he can torture people for fun. And that's horrific. So I don't know. He used it as an excuse to me there. Like it has that theme in it, but there's really nothing to say in Witchfinder General about God or Satan or anybody. But again, it is the first folk horror film. So very interesting kind of dynamic to dive into here. To me, it's whatever you want it to be, really. But there are certain check boxes that I personally, for me, would want checked off if I'm going to consider something, folk horror or not. That's just my thing. But I don't know. Down the road, like I said, I would like to do some more of these. The Demon is the one. That was the number one movie in this documentary that I watched that I was like, I really want to watch that. It looked really cool. The Demon from, I think, 1963, black and white Spanish horror film looked really, really cool to me. And I really want to give that one a look somewhere down the road. But yeah, no, that is probably going to be it. Unless, like I said, anybody wants to talk about anything, speak now or forever hold your peace. If not, no worries. This was a fun show. Let's see. You got to draw a line somewhere through, though, because I refuse to call John Carpenter's Halloween folk horror because, yeah, exactly. You definitely have to draw the line somewhere. I'm saying I would draw the line with the rural landscapes, the, stuff like that, the pagan mythos. Like to me, I would draw a line somewhere. Like I agree. I don't think Candyman is folk horror. I don't. I think I would say like UFC Breakdown was saying, like psychological slasher or urban legend, like Tom was saying, something more like that. It may be a theme, a folk tale in there, but not folk horror to me. Still a great movie either way. I don't care what you classify Candyman as. Still a kick-ass movie. But I don't know. That is what it is. But all right, everybody. I wanted to say thank you. This was a very fun show of talking all things folk horror. I hope I gave you guys some fun recommendations with the Unholy Trinity. I enjoyed doing this, and I would like to do one down the road that's going to be folk horror again. It would be really fun. But also next week, going to announce the show for next week. It is the Horror Roundtable Volume 3. Yes, I'm super excited to announce Mr. AJ Zetro will be returning. Will from the Cabinet of Dr. Howdy will be returning. And also, first-time guest, good brother Brandon from Whopper Horror. He will be on the show as the four of us go into the Horror Roundtable, where each of us pick 2 topics. We go around the table and discuss our thoughts. I've done 2 of those already. Both of them went fantastic. Last one we did with Night Watch Zone, Rainbow Fright, and Coriander. It was fantastic. And same with the first one. I loved the first one as well. Great stuff. So I'm excited for volume 3. We're going to have a lively show next week. So please, guys, come and support. You like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Appreciate the help and support as always. Fear says, how about Halloween 3? I mean, there's a ritual. There's sort of witchcraft. The Stonehenges, maybe, definitely more so than the original Halloween. Definitely elements. I don't know. You're missing the rural landscape there, but I don't know. Elements, definitely elements. Good show. Time to folk off. Tom is like, I don't give a shit what is folk or not folk. Folk off. But thank you for watching, Tom. Great stream as always. Thank you, brother Neil. I appreciate it. Good night, Grande, and everyone else. Always top quality. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. My first horror roundtable. Oh, I thought you were at the last one. Halloween 3 is folk horror theme, but not race. Exactly. I would agree with that wholeheartedly. But everybody, thank you so much for watching. And we will catch you next time. I am the Cemetery Man from Salem, Mass. Always taking aims at kicking candy ass. Live in the Goer here with you on Grande's Graveyard. Too sweet, peace, and we'll catch you next time. Good night, everybody. Cheers to the weekend.